Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tap into Magic podcast. It's been a minute, and I think that something major enough in the magic sphere sort of happened that I really felt the drive to sort of share it here on the podcast. And that being some of the major changes and major uh, I, I and I guess it's just a very large change, but the big stuff, and I guess really the other part is the drama surrounding the changes of the Commander format. For a very long time, for years, the Commander Rules Committee, which is a group of people, if you don't know, that make the rules a separate party from Wizards, third party, not in any way affiliated. That create the rules for Commander, so you know the 100 card format, all of that. Originally spearheaded by Sheldon Menery, who is usually known as the Godfather of the format, but they also not only with the rules comes also the bans, so what cards they deem able to be played in the format, and more important, really the cards that they deem should not be allowed in the format for whatever reason that they decide. Since they are the kind of sole proprietors of the format, it was always up to them until sort of recently, which I will kind of get into. So for a very long time, they had sort of a track record of not doing much with the format, which, of course, everyone's going to critique anything they do, especially when you're on that major of a level where the most popular format in Magic is the thing that you're taking control of. There's always going to be someone nagging you in one way or the other, whether or not you're making too many bans or not enough bans or whatever. But for the most part, people are content with the fact that, oh, hey, they haven't banned anything in a while, which probably means that the format's doing well. Of course, you're always going to have cards that are being played more and expensive cards, but nothing too glaring. People were seeing right before anything happened in these past few. I think it's about a month ago this happened. I'm not exactly sure. Might date the video a little bit, but just in general, the card with Modern Horizons 3, a card called Nadu Winged Wisdom came out, and it was definitely a nuisance and immediately got banned in, I believe, pretty much every format. Mostly Modern was the big one, and I pretty sure Legacy as well. Not too super sure on that. I know Modern, that was kind of a big deal. And Commander, the rules committee was kind of talking about it in a recent update, and was like, "Hey, we're gonna keep track of this card, whatever. Kind of see how it melds with the format." And I myself even had a Nadu deck, mostly to try it out. I had owned a copy of the card, and I just taken apart a landfall commander deck that had the blue and green portions still intact. So I was like, oh, I'll just slap this on the front and see how it goes. And definitely can say with experience that it's a very solitary deck. You're just sitting there, playing the cards and taking a 20-minute turn because you never know what you're going to flip into. So it's one of those things that it's not deterministic. So even in a high power level setting, you still kind of have to wait for it because who knows, maybe you're not going to hit anything and just pass the turn after that 20-minute um, whole sitting there taking a bunch of game actions but not really accomplishing all that much. So with that, I built a very similar deck before that, with Karkashima, where you're just sitting there casting stuff, flipping stuff, the non-deterministic. It's not very fun for usually the player sitting there trying to do it all, just because you're kind of like, oh dang, I gotta, I'm keeping up the table, just taking a very long turn. So it's not great for the player playing it, and certainly is not great for the people that have to sit there and watch you because they also want to play the game. So that was a card that everyone knew was probably going to get banned in Commander as well, just because it still just didn't present a very fun gameplay loop for anyone involved. But when the ban time finally came around, it was not the only ban that was made that day. Alongside it were also Dockside Extortionist, Jewel Lotus, and Mana Crypt. And these cards, just for reference, especially with Mana Crypt, has been around as long as the format's been around. An all-star for a lot of people. Anyone that had their hands on it probably is running it in one of their decks just because it's that ubiquitous. Jewel Lotus being made for the entire format as well, literally being put into a product called Commander Legends, the first ever full set made for Commander. That was the chase card. That was kind of one of the bigger draws. And there's a lot of people, and I do agree it's probably was not a great idea to make in the first place, but that was one of the biggest things. If you're thinking Commander and you're thinking Commander specific cards, that's probably one of the first you think of, just because it's only available in that format, being as you can only use the mana that it makes on your Commander. And of course, Dockside being the really random kind of out of nowhere little precon rare that ended up spiking in value because it turns out when you make mana, when you enter the battlefield, and when a creature enters the battlefield, it makes more mana than it's worth, it goes positive. A lot of things can go infinite very fast. So it kind of had become a problem in a lot of games. Don't really like seeing Darkseid come down because it made a bunch of mana, and a lot of times could just run away with the game instantly for 2 mana, which is not a whole lot to ask to get, who knows, 7, 8, 9, 10 or more out, depending on what your synergy pieces are, or just enough to go infinite with some sort of loop. So it kind of made sense. I think people would have still been angry at the Dockside and Nadu bans if those were the only ones. But especially with Nadu, I think no one would really bat an eye. Kind of sucks for the players that had those decks, but they had to know that that was coming just with how, you know, awful and infamous the card had become in the very short time that it was allowed in any format. And Dockside is another one that it's sort of, you know, easy to see. I believe I specifically, but I've heard that the rules committee was also taking a look at that, and they had said that in some sort of previous update, or at least somewhere, that they were also looking at Dockside. So it also makes sense that that probably would get banned. And a lot of people, especially even people on the rules committee specifically, thought that those two bans would have been fine. But really, a lot of the controversy comes from the fact that they also banned Jewel Lotus and Mana Crypt. And like I was saying earlier, they had not really done anything for the format in terms of bannings for a very long time. I think they took the most recent one before this banning was, I believe, banning Golos and taking off Worldfire off the ban list. So a swap of 2 different cards in and out of the ban list, which I believe was in 2020. So it had been forever since that had happened. At least might have been 2021. It was right when I first started playing Magic. Had like maybe 2 decks, just trying it out. Almost built Golos about a week before it got banned. But they hadn't done much in a long, long time, and they had never talked about Jewel Lotus or Mana Crypt ever being on their radar. So it came as a huge shock to a lot of people, not only, you know, the cards that they're playing with, but also to their wallets. Like these cards are not inexpensive in any way. Mana Crypt being one of the most expensive non-reserve list cards you could run in a deck. I think getting up to about $200 is where it was about sitting for almost any copy, and Jewel Lotus sitting about 90 to 100, depending on the version you got. Not only that, another huge part of this is the fact that they were printed maybe a year beforehand, if that, less than a year. Jewel Lotus got printed in 2022, or it might have been a little bit more than that. The more recent one was actually a Mana Crypt being a special guest slot card in Lost Caverns of Ixalan. And I can definitely say, looking how collector boxes have spiked and had spiked. I don't know what they're sitting at now, but it definitely made a standard set collector box worth way more than it would have in any other way. You know, with all the just being able to get a foil, non-foil Mana Crypt, or all the neon variants that they had, especially, you know, looking at the fact that they didn't have serialized cards in that set. The sort of in the place of serialized cards were those basically serialized neon versions of both Cavern of Souls and Mana Crypt. So it was definitely a huge draw for the set, and definitely helped kind of bulking up that price for those sort of special collector packs. So I can imagine a lot of people, and I think also that might have been what kind of, you know, the last straw for maybe the rules committee, or just in general, seeing it more played, Mana Crypt played more often, because a lot of people were getting their hands on it through the Lost Caverns of Ixalan collector packs, and even set packs. I actually myself, a few months before the banning, kind of right after Lost Caverns came out, which actually might have been a long time ago, now that I think about it. But around the time the Lost Caverns of Ixalan came out, I had opened a bundle and had gotten a non-foil version out of a set pack. So I can definitely see how, you know, this might have increase the amount of play that we'd see of these cards, which might have put it more on their radar. But I can definitely say that everything all at once, it was too big of a shock for anyone. And I know a lot of people agreed with the bans, but there are a lot of people that also didn't. You know, people polls online I've seen were about 50-50. It was a very controversial sort of movement, and you can definitely see that with a lot of the reaction that the more radicalized people had, which eventually led to what I'll get to in a minute. But basically, to break it down, these happened, just got thrown out at everyone, and people were shocked. A lot of people lost a lot of money, and that was one of the bigger parts of it. And really, for me specifically, I feel bad for the people that are sort of like myself, that don't have a crazy amount of money to spend on all these cards. Like me, that may have pulled one in a pack, and I actually did own a crypt beforehand. But the only reason I did is because I have a store near me that will take a lot of the cards that I have, and I can trade them for value. So I traded in. I waited for months for them to have a crypt available, and traded in a large portion of one of my trade binders to get the card, especially before it had gotten a reprint. So it was even more expensive than it is now, or it was before the bans. After the reprint of the one in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. And so I am one of those people that are kind of in that middle ground of, not investing in the card in sort of like MTG finance bro sort of way. Um, and actually had to put a good amount of resource, whether that be actual money value or card value, to get the card. And it is most devastating, I think, to my demographic, and even people that may have paid full money for that. Or I even heard a lot of people at my LGS saying that they had gotten one or more of these cards, and I think someone had picked up one or two Mana Crypts literally the Friday before the Monday that they dropped this announcement, and didn't ever get to play the cards. So I feel bad for those type of people, and I do think a lot of people are too bad so sad, sucks to suck sort of mentality. But you really got to look at not just the people that are in this game for monetary value and want to keep their cards expensive, but the people that just you know saw this card, paid for the card, and now they can't use it anymore. Which that should not be the entire scope of what people look at when cards are getting banned, which is not what they were doing. They were doing it for the health of the game, and I can definitely understand that. I personally have not seen a lot of Jeweled Lotuses or Mana Crypts in a lot of my games outside of competitive, which is a whole nother problem that I probably won't even get into right now, because it's just it's so much extra to talk about. But in any non-competitive pod, I didn't really see Mana Crypt or Jewel Lotus all that often. Um, I really think it was just one of those things that my specific LGS, I do have to say, has a sort of power level system inherent within the way that they within their structure of games, and their sort of constructed official format. They have a different system than a lot of LGSs use, and it's not just, oh hey, free for all, we're going to do a tournament system. It's more of a lobby system where you put your name into the pool, and the names get called, and then you're just in a group with people, and they have it separated by power level based on their own ranking systems, infinite combos and that sort of thing. So they are one of those a few places, at least that I've seen in the sample size of game stores I've been to, that self polices a lot more than other places, and it does have a I would say an above average amount of people. There are nights that you'll see 50 or more people attend one of these events just for casual Commander, and they happen twice a week. So it's a lot of people you see, and I get to see a lot of different people come in and out, and so I feel like I have a fairly large sample size of different people, and the decks that they play, and sort of what cards are in them. So personally, I didn't really see much of a problem, and it is really hard. And I do think that was one of the critiques that at least I had with the rules committee, is it's very hard to get a true grasp of the everybody, and the I guess what I'm looking for is the demographic. You can't fully see everyone's situation. You don't know how many people are actually having a problem with Mana Crypt, and who are just the small minority that is telling you about it. Or who knows how much it's influenced by their own games, which that's definitely part of it. Whatever you play is what you're going to be influenced by, and how many people are just telling them hearsay, whatnot. There's so many different factors that come with it, that I think it's really hard for, especially a group of 6 people, I believe is how big the RC is, to make those decisions. I just think it's too small, and very obviously they do have a secondary group called the Commander Advisory Group, but unfortunately in this decision they were not called upon as being sort of the secondary group, and a slightly larger demographic to reach out to for that advice. So with just a sample size of 6 people and their experiences, I think it's kind of hard to really get that grasp and to fully make those decisions in a way that is justifiable for everyone. So in any way you slice it, it's always going to be a hard decision to make. And I do agree that while what happened in the aftermath of that of the decision of banning was definitely way over the top, and people have gone into it a lot. So I'm not going to keep repeating that. Yeah, those were terrible people that did what they did. Um, in retaliation, of course, but I definitely can see how that was not the best decision. I agree with what one of the rules committee members was more vying for this type of ban were to be just Bandai Dockside and Nadu, and leave the other two to maybe see how things adjust, and then maybe down the line um, ban one of the either Jewel Lotus probably first, and then maybe Mana Crypt, depending on how the game evolved and sort of how everything starts going on. Because the hard part is the power creep, and that was another thing people were talking about, especially with Mana Crypt. And like I said earlier, it's been around as long as the format's been around. And so that window to sort of ban things, a lot of people said it's passed because there's no way that it's more it's less balanced now than it was, when it originally. I don't know exactly when Commander started, early 2000s. There's no way that it's more imbalanced now than it was then. And so it was just dormant for so many years that I think that's definitely part of it. But I do agree that all of it all at once with no forewarning on at least half of the cards, if not, a lot of people say three-fourths of the cards. um no warning there, it does make it really hard to stomach that. And yeah, I guess I'll get to the sort of the aftermath. And what came next was these people faced a lot of harassment and a lot of threats, and there've been some hush tones of even more drastic things happening to these people, actually endangering them and their safety. So it's very much not a light matter. And of course, these people that made whatever actions against the rules committee are way out of line. I'm just gonna say that one more time. That's gonna be the last time I say it. Definitely amoral people. um, but what this really resulted in is, I think maybe a week later, it was not very long after that, um, the rules committee, along with Wizards of the Coast, had sort of come to this agreement that the rules committee would hand control of Commander over to the game design team at Wizards of the Coast. And so mostly, at least what I've heard from all my stuff, man, this is third, fourth, fifth hand information that I'm kind of giving out here. It's just sort of the general consensus. So I can't say any of it's completely wrong, but definitely take all the minor details with a grain of salt. Just because a lot of it is hearsay and a lot of it is just people saying what people have said, what people have said. But yeah, it was mostly a safety concern for a lot of it. And they are just volunteers. These people aren't getting paid. They aren't being run by Wizards. That was one of actually the bigger upsides for a lot of people with this rules committee running the game. Was they don't have a specific tie. There's no conflict of interest, as they are a completely separate entity. So with it going back to Wizards of the Coast brings a lot of consequences with it, and it's really hard to say at this moment what's going to happen because no changes have been made after that fact. But one major part, and right before this announcement got made, people immediately were like, "We can't really have trust in the rules committee anymore." Especially, I feel really bad for those people in the commander advisory group whose entire, jobs, the entire point of them being a part of that group was to help the rules committee. And the rules committee had decided not to tell them anything for fear of info leaks, which I do think is definitely a slap into the face to those people, just because it's like, well, if you don't trust us to keep this information, a secret until the week or whatever. Any sort of, they didn't have any say in the action that they made of the bannings, or they didn't even have knowledge of what it was going to be until I think 2 days beforehand they were finally told what was going to happen. So they got like barely any notice, but they didn't get any say on the actual decision. But if the main group does not trust you to not, keep this information secret, which they have done in the past. This is not the first time they've had a giant thing happen, or they were given knowledge on sets or cards beforehand and they had to keep their lips sealed. If they don't trust you for that, you know why would they trust you with anything else? I think it's kind of, the consensus a lot of them came to is like, well, if you don't value, my integrity as a person, why would you take any, words I say or any opinions I have on cards, either. It was just one of those things, and a lot of people started resigning. And I think before even the group got disbanded, which I think would be an eventuality, just with how fast people were leaving, it got officially handed over. So I don't really know if the Commander Advisor Group's a thing. I think technically the RC still exists, because the official article they put out, Wizard of the Coast put out, stating the decision to move over, said that they were going to work alongside the rules committee, but I'm not exactly sure how much that involvement is going to be. I think it's a lot less, and they want to at least show that it's going to be a lot less, um, because of all of the safety concerns, and they want to take the pressure off these volunteers that just love to play the game and want to make it a good environment. That's the baseline. It was never done with malice, and even if maybe they had not executed the exact correct way, there's still people that love the game, love the people that play it, and just want to give everyone the best experience. That's definitely a thing. I do think, and I agree with a lot of people, that in a vacuum with no other consequences, I do think that Jewel Lotus and Mana Crypt, they're just too ubiquitous. And I'm not getting into it, but competitive aside, in just a casual format, I do think they come to a point where it's too big of a jump in the game. If you were to get that, turn one or turn two, it changes the entire trajectory of the game, and kind of it makes it something completely different. And swings it way more. It's too swingy, I think, and I definitely can understand that. With the limited amounts I did play, with the cards myself, and see other people play with these cards in a more casual format. So I can understand, each side, but I definitely agree more with the side of this was not the correct decision. It was not executed in the correct way, and it is very unfortunate that this is what it's come to, with Wizards having to take over. I think if the sort of retaliation was not as harsh as it was, the rules committee would have most likely have stayed in charge and just kind of sucked up, all of the negativity that there was there. Well, with how drastic it became, it does make sense that this is, probably the most necessary outcome, unfortunately. But I do think, sort of to wrap it up, the consensus that this brings is the fact that, a lot of people online, especially those that made these accusations and did all of the negative stuff, have kind of seen that their behavior gives them what they want. Hey, you bullied these people enough that they have to step down, and you backed them to a corner, and they had no way out other than to just completely surrender. So I do think that sets a really bad precedent. And this is all stuff that other people have said. I just wanted to kind of give my piece on it, and I do think, um, personally, that I don't I, at this point, I think Jewel Lotus and Mana Crypt, it- they should not have been made. Specifically, Jewel Lotus, I do agree with that. But if this is the way they were going to take it, this is the way they were going to take it. And I do hope that it becomes a matter of, with the new tier system that they are trying to come around with, where they're trying to separate cards based on power level, that we see. I want it to be more of a soft sort of push in the right direction rather than a hard line, because I do think personally that a straight bracket system, where if you have a card in a specific bracket, like a bracket 4 card, um, and I guess I'll explain it a little bit, just give you a base run on, if you've never actually heard about any of this, if this is your first time hearing the information, alongside getting, this information of the, changing of hands of power. We were also told that the, the that Wizard of the Coast is designing a new power system, an official one, um, for players to use to kind of categorize their decks. Makes it a little easier than just saying, "Oh, hey, my deck's a 7," that everyone has kind of memed onto a point, because it doesn't really make a lot of sense and doesn't really mean anything. So they have, 1 through 4 different tiers so far that they're base outlining. Nothing set in stone. So that's another thing to take with the grain of salt. Is all this information may change very fast. It may change very drastically. Um, so basically, if you have a card like Vampiric Tutor, I think was one of the examples they gave. If you run a Vampiric Tutor in your deck, it does not matter what else is in your deck. If you have a Vampiric Tutor, it is automatically a tier 4 deck. So that's the highest tier. Which I think that line of thinking is not very great, because with people that, in the situation that we just had, where a lot of new players that may not have had their hands on powerful cards like Mana Crypt, just happened to open one out of a new set, they can't really run that in any of their decks because they are not built around it. And one of the biggest parts of Commander is the accessibility for new players, and I think it does muddy the waters quite a bit when every single card, or at least a lot of cards, have to be put in some sort of system. It does make it very much harder for everyone to get into, other than just having, oh, hey, don't play with these list of like 2 dozen cards that you're probably not going to see anyway, because most of them are either really, really old or, just really, really expensive. So I think really it's going to be kind of hard to see, and I would have way preferred, and so I think a lot of people talked about, and I agree, is a way better way to do it, is just have more of the Canlander, Canadian Highlander, um, point system, where instead of being like, hey, this is just a tier 4, be like, okay, I have this many points to go with the 10 points or whatever, that Canlander uses, and if I have a card worth points, I can only have so many um, in my deck at any one time. So I think that allows people to kind of play with the cards they want, and it does limit everything to a certain extent, to where you still can sort of have that varied gameplay, but not be locked into one specific, power level just because you play one specific card. I think it way more makes sense, and even if you, I feel like one of the better things to do if you still want to have a bracketed system, just a lot of different number of points. If you're like, oh hey, tier 1 here, you have 10 points. There's only certain cards that are pointed, so you still don't have to worry. Most new players aren't going to have to worry about, oh, hey, is this card pointed? Because not every card is going to be pointed. Have a smaller list for less people to worry about. And then also, if you're tier 1, you have 10 points. If you're tier 2, you have 20, 30, 40, something like that. Or however they think, the scale would work better. Maybe tier 4, you actually need 50 points, just because, to get to that next level of power, it's going to require more cards. Whatever it ends up being, I really think that that sort of system would work a lot better, because it really gives more of that scalability and does not, gatekeep certain cards to being at a certain level. And they even have exceptions already, like Sol Ring. Both the rules committee and the original bannings talked about being sort of a hypocritical non-banned card, which I very much understand. You cannot ban a card that has been in literally every Commander product ever to make every deck unavailable to every new player, because that basically ruins the entire system they have going. And it's just one of those things that you also can't put into a tiered bracket system, because that will probably make most decks whatever level they decide Sol Ring is. And I think they even said that, like, yeah, Sol Ring's a level 0. It's one card that doesn't even have a rank, because it is just too ubiquitous, which it is hypocritical, and people will be like, or trying to be that contrarian, or like the cynicism of like, oh, hey, well, this is stupid, nothing matters. But if you look at it more objectively than that, and not just, word for word, it makes sense that they cannot ban that card. I definitely understand that, and I have no qualms with that. One of the few things I don't really have qualms with in the whole thing, but I do think, this is now the state of everything. Wizards of the Coast now officially has control of the Commander format, which was an inevitability. At some point they were going to have to take it over. It's their game, and I think it was more of a nicety, especially when Sheldon was around, really manning everything to allow them to take control of the game. But no, now that everything's changing, things have been done that can't really be undone. New expectations have been set. We'll see what happens going forward. There is now, unlike previously, that sort of conflict of interest, where Wizard of the Coast has the ability to ban cards in the format, and what a lot of people are saying, what I kind of agree with, is if it was originally in Wizard of the Coast hands, they would have never banned either Jewel Lotus or Mana Crypt, especially with how recently they've been printed. They literally had just released the Festival in a Box for Vegas 2024 with 2 collector packs whose top end cards were both Mana Crypt and Jewel Lotus, a Commander Masters pack and a Lost Caverns of Ixalan collector pack. So both of those packs, one of the biggest draws to actually get that box was the fact that you could get these high level cards, which are no longer available to the players who get them. I think I even saw someone post online, I can't say how real it was, because it was almost too good to be true. Someone had pulled both a neon foil Mana Crypt and a full art textured foil Jeweled Lotus out of their 2 packs. And for that sort of person, it's a really huge feel as bad, because something that would be worth probably over $1,000 is way less than that, which you still can't really complain because even at that point, the cards have not gone so far down. A lot due to speculation of people being like, well, now that things have changed hands, who knows what they're going to go with? And I do think that's really the next thing to look out for and going to be kind of the next big drama piece, no matter what happens, just what Wizards ends up doing first now that they have, control of the format. And that, I think that's what everyone's kind of waited for with bated breath. And I don't know how long they're going to take. And I don't think they really should take too long to do anything. I think they need more concrete rules. And another thing is, I think earlier on the rules committee was kind of hinting at, alongside the bans, originally they were hinting at the bracket system or some sort of system to help with cards. And I think they are prematurely rolling it out to try to sate the masses, being like, okay, hey, this is kind of why we're trying to have a more concise format and allow people to kind of, match those decks up more, and try to really pump up that Rule Zero conversation, which a lot of people aren't having and just never really did have. So I do think it's kind of getting to that point where um, they're going to need to really keep up, at least at the moment, now that everything has just started to change hands. They really definitely need to, keep up with the community and keep information rolling, because people were just have this really heightened sense of anxiety right now with everything that's happened and everything that might happen. It's such a big change, probably the biggest change, I mean, dare I say, Magic has ever had, the biggest controversy, the biggest, consequences, it being the biggest format and, the most popular time for Magic ever right now. Um, it's definitely something I think they're going to need to keep a close eye on and really, let the community in on as things develop. But yeah, I think that's about all I had to say here. Just kind of wanted to give my thoughts on it. I know I kind of regurgitated a lot of what other people have said so far, but I do think I have a slightly different view than a lot of people do, and I just think it's good for me, specifically, to get my thoughts out there. And I thought everyone would like to know sort of what where I stand on this, and if nothing else, give people that may not watch those other content creators, this valuable information. But other than that, I do hope that everyone there that is listening to this has enjoyed the video or podcast or wherever you're listening to this to, and I will see all of you in the next one.